we fell on the very, very devout side. My dad was a pastor most of my life until he was arrested in a sex trafficking sting, which he would always be a pastor at small churches. So he would have to work another job in order to support our family. And the jobs he tended to work would always travel. He did have his credentials stripped from the Assemblies of God. Live Dead is all really centered around Romans 12:1, which talks about offering yourself as a daily living sacrifice to the Lord, and that this is like the proper and acceptable form of worship. And at that time in the Assemblies of God, there were a lot of regions that were switching over to being Live Dead exclusively. And India was one of them. The hope was that we would start to convert people, have them be the leaders of a Tibetan church. Who decides what God's will is? Because in my experience, God's will tends to be what the leadership wants. Created my whole sense of self around this call to be a missionary. And I finally started to try to figure out who even am I without that? And I just remember at the time crying out to God, like, I'm ready to die for you, but not like this.
Mine is the only voice.
Wow.
What have I been doing?
Lay down my autonomy.
After that, it got very dark very quickly.
Hey guys, my name is Shalise Ansola, and this is Cults to Consciousness, where we discuss leaving high-demand religions or organizations and finding healing and independence through awareness and true individual sovereignty. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you leave those words of encouragement down below for our guests who are bravely coming on and sharing their stories with us today. And of course, liking, subscribing any way that you can boost the algorithm really is the best way to support the show. Today's guests reached out to us through our Jot form. You're always welcome to do so through our About section. You can fill out that little application form there. And then it keeps all our potential guests in one place. We're talking about Assemblies of God today, but a specific branch called Live Dead, which basically expects you to be a living daily sacrifice to God. And we'll talk about all the ways that got really dangerous, not just spiritually, but actually physically going into places that aren't necessarily welcoming of missionaries, and also how her childhood shaped her into becoming this person. So thank you so much for joining us, Liz Dieatrick.
Thank you so much for having me. I have definitely gone on a personal journey of realizing how high control of a group that I grew up in and was involved in. Even to this day, there are still things where I'll talk about it and a friend or my husband will point out that isn't okay.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of that happens, especially once you get into therapy or just have regular conversations and people go, wait, what? And you go, oh, is that weird?
Right. It's like, that's not normal? I thought that was normal.
Let's talk about your childhood. So you have an interesting story that happens before you were even born. So how do we get there?
According to my mother, she was told by a doctor that she was infertile. She would not be able to have any children. And she rebuked the doctor and told him that she would have a baby when God wanted her to. And a few months later, she found out she was pregnant with me.
Wild.
And so before I was even born, there was very high expectations.
Do we know the details of that, though? Do we know, why he said she was infertile?
So I think she had, according to her, but my parents aren't really great about actually going to doctors very often. They tend to do the homeopathic route. So it's hard to know what is true and what isn't, according to my parents' testimonies for things. She said that she had PCOS, which is something that I have too. And that can make it harder to get pregnant.
Yeah.
But she also claimed that being pregnant with me cured her PCOS. So I don't know. And she did have another child after me. She wanted to have 4, but my brother's head was so big that she decided to stop at 2.
I can relate to that.
Later on. It's because they just get bigger. Each one gets bigger.
Oh, Lord. You're helping me make the decision of if I want 3 or not, because this last one about ripped me in half.
Sometimes it's different, but typically each child is larger.
Okay.
My best friend stopped at 2 as well. And then later on, we adopted 2 additional siblings out of the foster care system, but they weren't adopted until I was in high school. And so they were only with me in the home for about 4 years before I was gone.
Okay.
The pressure I already had at my birth, it only increased. So as a child, looking back, I think I just had night terrors because I still used to have night terrors and PTSD nightmares up until I got medicated for it. So now I'm on the same medication that like soldiers are on for PTSD
Whoa.
nightmares. These night terrors, according to my mother, I would wake up crying and I would tell her that I would see the like faces of people and I didn't know where they were or what language they were speaking, but that God wanted me to share the gospel with them.
Whoa.
And so I don't remember telling her this. I only remember her telling me that I told her this. So even before I was even at an age where I could start deciding who I was and who I wanted to be, I was already being told that God had called me to missions. And as an impressionable child, I believed it wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
I also was undiagnosed autistic. And so I learned pretty quickly that who I was wasn't acceptable. And anytime I was anything other than cheerful, I would get punished for that. And then I would get rewarded for every day that I was cheerful. When I went through all of this and when I eventually deconstructed, I wasn't just deconstructing from a faith. I was deconstructing a whole sense of self that had been built around this. I was born and called to be a missionary.
I mean, that's truly next level. In Mormonism, growing up Mormon, being a missionary was a really big deal. But to say that you were literally born to be a missionary, there is no choice in that. And as a kid, of course, you're going to believe what your parents say. We're wired from 0 to 7. The messages we hear is our inner voice. And so your parents telling you this over and over before you even really had language, they're telling you this thing. So of course, you're going to just walk into it because what other choice do you have?
The Assemblies of God is one of the faith traditions that believes in the gifts of the Spirit, including praying in tongues. I could still do it to this day, but I don't because I feel like it's weird. But I could pray in tongues for as long as I can remember. And whether I was just mimicking my mom or if it was my own unique thing, I don't know.
Yeah.
I was seen as this super spiritual kid, and I was always very sold out for God, like they used to say in the early 2000s. There would be things like I would have a friend over for a sleepover, and my mom would catch us being up late, and I would be reading to them out of Revelations about the crazy monsters and creatures that would be there during end times as a tactic to save my friend.
Right.
Because when you instill that idea of like an eternal conscious torment hell into a child, if that child has any shred of empathy at all, they're not going to be able to have normal relationships with the people around them. Every relationship is going to be like, I need to save you.
Yeah.
From this horrible thing.
I can imagine, because for you, growing up, monsters were very real and potentially waiting for you on the other side of death. And your friends are just probably like, wait, what?
Right.
Because I'm in the phase right now with my toddler where she's like, oh, no, monsters. I'm like, monsters are pretend. Monsters are pretend. But when you tell someone, that's why I don't agree with, and I know everyone has different opinions and that's totally fine. I don't necessarily agree with teaching kids the Bible at a young age because it's terrifying. The stories are terrifying. And there are stories that even for adults, it's like, ooh, that's a lot to think about, you know? And so teaching kids about monsters and they're going to get swallowed up for all of eternity if they're not good kids, that does a lot psychologically to a child.
And I definitely developed religious OCD. I had a very high level of scrupulosity, like the verse about praying continually and rejoicing in all things. I was like praying in my head all of the time and just constantly repenting anytime I felt like I had sinned, because there was that worry of, especially when I was younger, if I sinned and died before I repented, I might go to hell.
Yeah.
And so that terror was there very young.
Wow.
And just growing up, I was the kid who started the Bible study in their middle school. It was actually really funny. There was this movement called the 7 Project at the time, and it gave kids all of the tools to start Bible studies, as well as like the legal framework of it, of if your school was resistant. And I just remember going into the principal's office thinking I was going to have to, like battle this out. And the principal was like, okay, that's fine.
I love that. You're like ready to go to war for your faith.
I was ready.
I'd like to get a baseline because I know we've done a few Assemblies of God, as you know, right? Because you're like, oh, that's why I decided to submit.
Yeah, that's why I submitted, because I was like, oh, she asked for more AG people, and I have a different experience than Chi Alpha. Like I've known people in Chi Alpha, but I was never a part of it because I went to an Assemblies of God school.
Yes. So I know that there is this huge range because it's an enormous church, apparently bigger than the Mormon church even.
Oh, yeah.
But there are so many ways people choose to practice it, either super fundamentalist or kind of casually, and it's not very harmful. At least that's what I'm hearing is on the other end of the spectrum, it's kind of like whatever. So where did your family fall on this spectrum of devout to casual?
We fell on the very, very devout side. My dad was a pastor most of my life until he was arrested in a sex trafficking sting, which I will get to in the part of my story when that occurs.
Okay.
That is true. So the Assemblies of God has like a national office, but the national office oversees district offices, and then each church is like self-governing. So as long as the pastor and the church agrees to the Assemblies of God's 16 fundamental truths, which is their like core doctrines, then that church can be a part of it. But it is very, very, like you said, but my family was very fundamentalist, even more from my mom than my dad. My mom was very, very strict for things. Part of why I was so just focused on salvation and end times is the AG is pretty apocalyptic in its thinking. Of the fundamental truths, like 13 through 16 are all about the end times. And so it's like you have to believe these specific things about end times prophecy to even be considered an Assemblies of God pastor.
Yeah, I'm wondering, the reason I asked is because when you talk about scrupulosity and things that you would repent for, I was wondering what type of things you were considering as sin when you were a kid.
Not being obedient to my parents, even thinking about being disobedient, because Jesus talks about how, like, if you even have hate for your brother, that's the same as like murdering them.
Whoa.
And so that then brings sin not just into what you're doing, but also what you're thinking. And so I was taught to police my thoughts at a very young age to make sure I was, thinking obediently towards my parents, thinking obediently towards God. I don't have any memory of anything happening, but there were a few situations where there was suspected sexual abuse that occurred to me. And so I started masturbating at a very young age, not really understanding what I was doing.
Yeah.
When I was caught and told it was a sin, then that was something too that I always felt I had to repent for if I did it.
Right. What age did they catch you doing that? Were you already older?
I think like 4 or 5.
Okay. So, I mean, you really didn't have any concept of what it was at that age.
No.
Which, PSA, it's very normal and natural for kids to do that. I just want to throw that out there.
And there's kind of a double standard, I think, because when boys discover their, stuff, parents are just like, oh, it's so funny that he holds it all the time.
Yeah.
But if a girl does stuff, it's not okay.
Yeah.
Not for everyone. But I do feel like, especially maybe more in Christian circles, I've encountered that kind of double standard for children.
Oh, wow. So where do you want to go from here? Do you want to talk about adolescent years, or when does this stuff with your dad come into play?
In high school, this was when I actually first heard about Live Dead, which I would eventually become a part of. It was founded in 2003, which was just like 3 years before I graduated from high school. And so when I heard about this new missions movement within my denomination that was specifically focused on reaching unreached people groups, I was really interested. I was also very interested in just how driven and sacrificial they were. Because again, there's another verse, I think it's Matthew 24:14, that talks about like once the gospel reaches all the nations, then the end will come. And so it was that, oh, we need to do our job so that Jesus can come back. And also, I just had this deep concern and fear about what happens to the souls of all the people who live in places that have zero access to the gospel and live and die. What happens to them? Do they go to hell? That doesn't seem very fair.
Right.
And so I want to go and give them that opportunity.
That's how I felt growing up. I
Right.
was just like, okay, but there aren't very many Mormons around the world.
Right.
What about all these people who don't even know about it? That's not fair at all. But then
No.
in my mind, I was also like, well, because they had this little caveat. If they haven't heard about it, they can get it in the afterlife, but it takes longer to be baptized or something. And then someone has to do it
Yeah.
here on earth for you. And I was like, yeah, but then you can live however you want.
Right.
and then deal with it later. But I always remember grappling with that too as a kid. Like, this doesn't make any sense. And then also in the same breath say, I'm so lucky that I just happened to be born in Utah. How lucky am I?
Yeah, I felt the same way. I felt just so blessed to have been born in the family that I was born into, because I knew Jesus and had a personal relationship with him from a very young age, because I talked to him in my head all of the time because I was
Same.
praying without ceasing,
Right.
because the Bible told me I should pray without ceasing. So that was just the space that I was in. I went on a few short-term trips. They're called Ambassadors in Missions, or like AIM. It's through the Assemblies of God. I went on 2 in high school and then 1 later on as a leader, just to help out. But it was from there that I then went to North Central University, formerly North Central Bible College, before it got its like official credentials. I was technically a missions major, but they don't call it that for the sake of people like me who go to restricted access countries. So my degree is in intercultural studies. And then everyone who goes to North Central graduates with a Bible minor, because we have all of the required classes necessary to get a minor in biblical studies.
Yeah.
And the test that I eventually took to become an Assemblies of God pastor, I had already taken it before in my like spiritual fundamentals class in college. So it's like, oh yeah, I've already aced this test. I know how to do it.
Funny. What does it look like in college learning how to go on missions? What are they actually teaching you?
So I was on the international development track. So our focus was a lot of business as missions and a lot of holistic community development. And some of the things I think are actually helpful, because it was teaching a lot about how if you're going into a place and you want to help with their infant mortality rate, if they're more concerned about chickens dying, you have to address the chicken problem first before you can address the infant mortality problem first, because you have to get the community buy-in for any type of development. And so it was a lot of that. When I went on my practice course for that, it was in Uganda. I lived in a village that was a development project. And so they were just starting to dig latrines. They'd just gotten a well. It was a very interesting trip because I got appendicitis while I was there. And first they took me to the nearest clinic, which was for like child encephalitis. And so they diagnosed me, but they didn't have the equipment there to do the proper surgery. And so we drove 8 hours to Kampala International Hospital while I'm just like laying in the back of a...
8 hours.
6 hours.
6 still. I got my appendix out and I know that pain. And I know that if
Yeah.
you don't catch it soon enough, it could rupture.
According to the surgeon, it was very close to rupturing, but they got it out and it was good. But the funny thing about that is my teacher was very impressed with me. So I had my appendix out and I wanted to go back to the village immediately, but she kept me for 2 days. But she would brag about how, oh yeah, this student, she had her appendix out and she had a surgery and she was back in the village in 2 days to like do her work. And I found out like 5 years later when I had interns visit me where I was serving as a missionary in India, that she was still bragging about me to that day, but had added additional details about how it had been a blessing that it happened in Uganda because it's cheaper to get medical stuff done there with the travel insurance, and that my family couldn't have afforded to have it removed in the States, which definitely isn't true. It's just interesting being mythologized at my alma mater in that way.
How did you internalize that happening to you? Did you spiritualize it in any way?
Yeah, I spiritualized it a bit. I used to make jokes about how some people leave their heart in places that they travel, but I left my appendix. But I saw it as a test if I was willing to give my all for God. And I felt like I had passed that test. A couple of years later, still in college, I had another very similar test where I almost died during my internship in Indonesia. I got dengue fever and typhoid at the same time. And it was right before we were on a very rural island and we were taking the kids on a trip to Bali, Indonesia. And so I got sick the day we were taking the 2-day boat ride to Bali.
Oh no.
I don't remember the boat ride because I was in the really high fever from dengue. I just remember like a few moments of feeling like really cold hands on me and people muttering like very concerned in Indonesia. And then I woke up in the hospital to find out that I had almost died. And it was really tough for me after that because with dengue, right after the really high fever, you get like this full body rash that's extremely painful. Like when I would open bottles of water, it would feel like I was cutting my hand, or if I was like walking, it felt like I was walking on broken glass.
Oh.
But if you push yourself too much afterwards, you can relapse back into the high fever and your body typically can't handle it and you would die. And I saw this as another test of, am I really willing to die for my faith? And I just remember at the time crying out to God, like, I'm ready to die for you, but not like this.
Yeah.
Like I was ready to be like a martyr for my faith, but I didn't want to be taken out by like a fever.
That's what gets me with all of these more extreme groups and the mission trips and stuff that are clearly dangerous is there's no point in you dying. Like,
no,
everything's going to be okay.
right.
People will continue speaking about the gospel and hearing about it and going on these trips. You don't need to die. You don't need to keep proselytizing. It's okay to heal. And so they glorify this self-sacrifice. And if something did happen, they probably would have held you up as a martyr, as a warrior for God. And just why? It's totally unnecessary.
It would have been senseless.
Yeah.
But not long after that experience, I graduated college with more zeal than ever, but I had student loans to pay off. So I moved back home with my parents. I worked a full-time job Monday through Friday, and I became associate pastor at the church that my father was the senior pastor of. And I did children's, youth, and worship. So I was doing most of the other ministries other than being the senior pastor. And so I didn't have any days of rest because my Saturdays were completely filled with making sure that everything was ready for Sunday. At the time, I felt like it was fine because, of course, this is what I should be doing because I'm called to be a missionary and I need to do whatever I need to do to get there as quickly as possible. And part of that is getting rid of my student loans so that I didn't have to raise because in the Assemblies of God, as a missionary, you have to raise your own budget and your own support to go over. And if you have student loans, you have to raise additional support to pay for those student loans. And I always felt that was just really weird to like crowd fund getting my loans paid off from churches. But I got that paid off. Then I applied to be a missionary. I was laser focused on being a part of Live Dead. And at that time in the Assemblies of God, there were a lot of regions that were switching over to being Live Dead exclusively. And India was one of them. And that's going to be important later for a red flag that I have that I totally missed at the time.
Yeah.
But it was at that time, right when I got approved, that my dad got arrested in a sex trafficking sting.
Ooh.
And the whole way it happened is still just really frustrating to me. My dad was on a business trip for work, which he did take a lot of. And he usually always called my mom, and he didn't call my mom that night, and she couldn't get a hold of him. And when he did get back to her, he came up with some story about his phone dying and being really tired. It wasn't until the next week when my dad was in the hospital for like a surgery that while he was under, my mom was checking the bank account and she saw the check that was cashed by a bail bondsman to get him out of jail. She was asking him about that when he woke up from surgery and he was spinning another tale. And then shortly after, someone from church emailed her a news article that she had seen with my dad's name and the names of all the other men arrested in this sex trafficking sting in the next state over. Ooh. So he wasn't on this business trip. He was in the next state over. What still I think gets me to this day is that he never owned up to it. He still says that he was going to the hotel for a massage. The thing is, I know he's not stupid. He knows that there are many legal places to get massages, many normal places to get massages. Like, who goes to a hotel room to get a massage?
Right. So do you know the details, or can you share? It's okay if you can't.
So it was a police setup for the sting. The prostitute that my dad was soliciting was a cop. And so when he got there, he took off his clothes because she asked him to take off his clothes, and then he was arrested.
Oh boy. So is it your opinion that this was happening frequently, or it was like a one-off?
I think so, because my mom had suspicions in the past that he was maybe being unfaithful when he was traveling for work, because my dad was always bivocational as a pastor, because he would always be a pastor at small churches. So he would have to work another job in order to support our family. And the jobs he tended to work would always travel. And there was actually one time in my childhood that my mom thought he was being unfaithful. And she actually prayed that if he was being unfaithful, that God would make it stop. And he lost his job, so he was no longer traveling anymore.
I mean, I don't know what's going on with your mom, but it seems like she's got some sort of powers going on. I'm just kidding. I don't know if it's coincidence or if she's got direct connects upstairs.
She definitely believes she's got direct connects. I think she just has really amazing intuition.
Okay, or that.
But I mean, if God is real, she has a direct connect.
So your dad, did he end up going away officially, or was just that one arrest?
It was that one arrest. The case against him ended up being dropped because I guess the police had made some mistakes in the sting operation. So it wasn't something that they could confidently pursue and win in court. So he got away with it legally, but he did have his credentials stripped from the Assemblies of God, and he has not been a pastor since. They initially put him in a restorative counseling program. And the way those work is you get counseling from another pastor. Sometimes the pastor has actually counseling licenses, but not always. After you finish that program, they decide if you get to keep your credentials or not. And because he was never repentant, he didn't get to keep his credentials. And so I'm glad he's not a pastor anymore.
What did that do to you? Because you grow up, your dad is this pastor. I'm sure you looked up to him and probably held him on a pedestal. And then you find this out.
I definitely spiritualized it at the time. And to me, it was sort of an example of look at how dangerous it is to be doing what God wants you to do, because like Satan is going to try to tempt you and attack you with these things. And if you aren't careful and you fall for these temptations, it just will spiral from there, and you'll, fall from grace, and you will like damage your reputation and testimony and not be able to like serve God well anymore.
That is an interesting perspective that I was not expecting, but it makes total sense. I was expecting you to say maybe this was the first crack where you realized that pastors aren't up on a pedestal, or they're not immune to all of these sinful things, or that, they're just people too, type of thing. But that's a really interesting perspective.
I definitely never thought they were immune, but it's more of, the more you try to serve God and the bigger impact you might have, the more Satan is going to try to stop you.
Yes.
Is how I saw it. And I saw my dad as someone who fell for that temptation.
Okay. So it's kind of the opposite. Instead of seeing him as, oh, there are bad apples in positions of power, it was, he's so good that that's why he was tempted and failed.
Mm-hmm. And now looking back, I just see bad apples everywhere.
Yeah.
And on my channel, like I've covered and looked at bad apples within the AG specifically. So now looking back, it's just that realization of it's not that, people in power are being attacked by Satan more. It's that being in that position of power, one, can attract a certain type of man who enjoys that type of authority. Or two, when you're in that position of authority, you start to realize how much you can get away with.
Yeah.
And so in hindsight, I definitely look at it differently.
Yeah.
But at the time, my shelf was not anywhere near breaking. If people are familiar with that metaphor, when you're really in a belief system, anytime you encounter something that goes against your faith, you just don't want to deal with it. You put it on the shelf. And eventually there's too many things on the shelf and it breaks. And it took me a long time to get there. I had a very strong shelf.
Right.
From there, continued to just try to get to the mission field. I raised my funds and I ended up going. This is where I think some of the red flags that I missed come up. We had some stateside training. One of them was this really crazy security training where there was like an active shooter part of it. We were told we weren't supposed to talk about this training because it would make other people too prepared for it when they took it. But there was all of these different scenarios that we had to go through. I was picked for a kidnap scenario, and they don't tell you ahead of time. They like called our names, put bags over our heads, took us to another room, and it was like a kidnap scenario situation. And I was actually the one to take charge because I was remembering everything that we had learned in the class. And I immediately started trying to like humanize ourselves to the kidnappers. But I actually had one other girl in the class afterwards say, if I ever get kidnapped, I hope it's with you.
Oh
and I was like, let's just hope we don't ever get kidnapped.
What? Okay. Just have to say this. It's one thing to prepare for a mission and know you're going to a potentially dangerous place, but they're actually preparing you for these horrible situations, which tells me they're intentionally putting you in dangerous situations, not just you might be in one. It's we're going to make sure that you are prepared for the danger we are sending you into.
And one of the things they taught us was actually how to handle government interrogations, because this security class was specifically for missionaries going to restricted or closed access countries where it's not legal to be a missionary, or it's not legal to be the like type of missionaries we were. And so we had training on how to handle if, we're going through customs in another country and they're questioning why we're there, or if we get taken into a government office in country and they're questioning while we're there. and how we're supposed to answer questions so that we don't incriminate ourselves and we don't incriminate our team members. So that was a part of the training. And that should have been a really big red flag. But to me, it was that this level of deception is acceptable because the cost is so high to reach these unreached people groups, and their souls are more important than me potentially getting put in like another country's prison for
Yikes.
breaking the laws.
And it's a group called Live Dead. So maybe it's a good time to talk about what that means.
Live Dead is all really centered around Romans 12:1, which talks about offering yourself as a daily living sacrifice to the Lord, and that this is like the proper and acceptable form of worship. And so it was all about laying down your life, your wants, your needs, your desires, as if you are dead, and then being alive in Christ and doing what God wants you to do with your life. In that situation, who decides what God's will is? Is it God speaking through you, or is it the leadership? Because in my experience, God's will tends to be what the leadership wants.
Right.
Another red flag in hindsight comes up for me when we were a few months in India in the like training orientation team. We traveled to the town where the like leader of Live Dead for our region lived. And that's when we went over the MOU, which is the Memorandum of Understanding, which was like all the things that Live Dead India specifically stood for, what our missions and values were. And then at the end of this, we had to sign off on it or not sign off on it. But why wasn't this done before we raised our funds, before we arrived in India, before we were living there for months? And at that time, any new missionary going to India from the Assemblies of God was exclusively Live Dead. They weren't doing the other more normal type there. And so if you decided to not sign the MOU, you would just go home. And what do you tell all of your supporters? What do you tell all of the churches that you went and spoke at and got them to support you? And so I was completely sold on this vision at the time. And so this didn't even cross my mind as really inappropriate. But why is it there? There's so much pressure to say yes.
Mm-hmm.
And what if you did disagree to anything in there? I feel like that was just so inappropriate.
Yeah. Coercive.
The next red flag came really quickly after. So we were supposed to be in training for 6 months learning Hindi at a language school. And during that time, we were supposed to be able to take trips to all of the different Live Dead teams in India. And then we were supposed to be able to tell the orientation team leadership where we felt God was calling us. And then they would make the decision, the final decision, what teams we would be assigned to. Well, at the end of 3 months, they told us that we're actually all going to be assigned early. We're not going to finish our language school stuff. We're just going to get assigned. And I got assigned exactly at the time where I wanted to, which was in northern India working with Tibetans, because I had actually done my senior project in college about how to reach Tibetans.
Really?
Like, it was the people group that was really on my heart. So I saw this as God. One of the other people who got assigned to that same team, she had told the leadership she was interested in being in any other team but that one. And they sent her to the one she didn't want to go to because she had skills that that leader for that team wanted. Because that team leader wanted to open a tea house, and this woman had gone to culinary school. And she wanted to work at one of the other like coffee house, tea houses, because a few of the Live Dead teams had that as their business, which another red flag, me included, a lot of us were working at illegally. Because to get to India, there is a missions visa, but it doesn't get approved. So we weren't going on the missions visa. We were either going on business visas, which meant that for India, you were like a liaison for an American business in India. So the people who did that had to have some other business supporting them.
Yeah.
And like signing off on paperwork, sometimes fraudulently. And then the rest of us were on tourist visas, and you're not allowed to work on a tourist visa, but we weren't getting paid to work at the tea house either once it opened. We were, one, breaking the law by working at a Indian business, to not being paid unless you count our mission support that we raised as payment.
Well, what do you mean? Like the money you got from donors to let you go on the mission? How much money did you have to raise for this?
So there was two separate things I had to raise. I had to raise a cash budget that was a certain amount, and it was like a pool of money that I had to do like and submit forms for travel. So it's like, oh, I need to fly back to the States, so I need to pull from that fund. And then the other one was a monthly support budget where churches or individuals had to give every single month to support me, because it was basically my stipend to live on, to pay my rent, to pay for my food. It was enough to live in India, not enough to live in the US, which is a problem later in my story.
So what are they actually facilitating if they're not providing? Well, do they provide the housing, but then you just pay them monthly?
Oh, no, they don't provide the housing. I had to find an apartment to rent in the town that I was
So
in.
what are they doing for you?
Nothing. So they make you raise your own support. And I think that's stupid, because the type of people who are good at selling themselves and getting a lot of money from donors and supporters typically don't make the best team players once they get to the field. And so it causes a lot of team strife, because you have all of these like type A go-getters and they're all butting heads all the time. And I don't know why you, as an organization, you don't have just people who go around and, speak and get people to donate and then employ your missionaries instead. But we were not employed. My status was technically self-employed that whole time, even though I was a missionary with the Assemblies of God. And so that's another red flag. And they designed the budgets for us. And so in hindsight, I didn't realize how much financial control they had over me, because they decided without me how much money I needed month to month and how much money I needed in that other budget. And I had to live off of that. And again, it was enough to live in the rural village in India that I lived, not enough to live back in the States when it came time for me to return to re-itinerate or raise more funds.
So you go with them and they basically tell you where to go and tell you how to interact with the people and bring people in, but they don't provide anything else.
No.
So what are the things that you're actually doing to try and convert people?
Live Dead is all about trying to make indigenous church planting movements. But in order to do that, you have to have your first few believers in your first church. And so our job was to make friends and share Jesus and share the gospel at any opportunity. And so when I first got to my team, the tea house wasn't open yet. And I would just go to different conversation classes that were happening in town, because the area I lived in, it's the Dalai Lama's hometown. His personal monastery was there. And so a lot of Tibetan refugees live there, some who just crossed the mountains from China to get out. Not all of them, but a lot of them have dreams of immigrating to other countries, like the US, the UK, or Australia, some of them France. And so a lot of them went to English conversation classes to improve their English. So I would meet people there, become people's tutors, and just hope that through my life and how I lived, they would see Christ through me and they would want to know, what's different about me. Part of it too is we were really encouraged to live at whatever level the people we were trying to reach were living at. And so I actually, and I'm not saying this to brag, but it was something I was proud of at the time, I actually lived at the lowest standards of all of my team. I made sure to get an apartment that was almost identical to the friends that I had made, whereas a lot of my other team members would look for additional amenities and like creature comforts, which there's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I would just spend a lot of time with them. I had some that were actually trying to read the Bible and were curious about it. Like they had one of the Gospels where it was in Chinese on one side and in English in the other. And they were like going back and forth trying to understand it because neither is their first language. And so they were asking me questions about things. And I thought this was like a really good opportunity to share the gospel. That was mostly it. The hope was that we would start to convert people and that we would have them be the leaders of a Tibetan church, of a Tibetan fellowship that would hopefully grow and expand. Because the hope was that it would come from them after we led them to Christ. And there was a lot of talk about, what does Tibetan Christianity look like? It was definitely interesting. I never managed to convert anyone while I was there, something that I'm very thankful for now, but something I was very ashamed of then because I felt like I was failing, but I had to keep reminding myself that stuff takes time.
How long were you there for?
About 3 years, because
Whoa.
I was supposed to serve 2 years, but I extended my term because I was enjoying myself, but 2, I was pressured because it was like, well, if you don't stay to handle the interns, then we won't be able to have interns here. And so I stayed to handle the interns.
Yeah.
Leadership definitely started to have plans for me. Only about a year total of me being there in India, my team leader went on furlough and they appointed me interim team leader. And at the time, I was the youngest person on the team, but they appointed me because I had pastoral experience, which the others didn't. There was definitely people on the team that resented it, but it was from there that leadership really started to single me out and decide my life track and plan without telling me until I expressed wanting to do something that was very different than what they wanted me to do.
Yeah.
And so I was already just very driven to like pioneering and frontier type missions. I really wanted to go to the places where people were unreached, and I wanted to work directly with unreached people groups. However, leadership then sent me on a training for teaching a new method of language learning, which I thought was helpful because I was like, oh, this is something that I can use when I go to reach unreached people groups. Well, it turns out they wanted me to get certified so that I would live in the orientation area and I would train other missionaries in this language learning method. And I would never interact with unreached peoples. I would be spending all of my time just training other missionaries, which was baffling to me because it's like, why do you take somebody who's really passionate and then like take them away from what they're passionate about? At the time, having to work at this tea house after it opened and seeing how now, because I'm having to work all day at this tea house and do stuff here, I can no longer minister to the friends that I was developing relationships with. I can no longer try to share Jesus with them. I was like, what am I even doing here? And so I had started talking to a Live Dead team in a different country, China, asking, hey, if I go there, would I be able to work with Tibetans? And they were like, you want to work with Tibetans? When can you join us? And so I went to leadership thinking it would be my leadership in India, like upper leadership, thinking it would be respectful to let them know that once my term ends, I'm not going to be returning. And that's when they got upset with me.
Yeah.
At the time, too, I felt like I was hearing from God. I felt like God was leading me on this change. I felt like I'd had all these signs that this was what was supposed to happen. And I told them that the Lord was leading me to transition to be a missionary in China instead. And I was told that hearing from the Lord is a group thing, not an individual thing. That we're meant to hear from the Lord with leadership. And really, it's because they had these other plans for me. And now their plans aren't going to work if I'm leaving. They talked to me to try to get me to stay. They had the woman who led the orientation team talk to me to try to convince me to stay. They had the wife of a really lovely couple who was in my orientation team, but we were then on different teams, talk to me to try to convince me to stay. All telling me stuff like, oh, you might not even be able to work with Tibetans there. And it's like, if I stay, I won't be able to work with them here.
Yeah.
That was what made me not leave Live Dead, but leave Live Dead India specifically. I was still ready to go be on another Live Dead team. So when I was in India, I was what is considered a missionary associate. You have to do that typically before you can become a fully appointed missionary. And missionary associates usually only serve 1 to 2 year terms. Like I said, I served 3 because I extended mine to take care of interns. But fully appointed missionaries will spend like 4 to 5 years at a time and then be like 1 year back to re-raise support and then go. And so I was ready to go fully in. I got approved for it with the Assemblies of God. And then I started to raise my funds and the pandemic hit.
Ah.
And so churches were closed. I couldn't go around to preach. I was having a really hard time getting on like video sermons. And the Assemblies of God put me in a position where I got into massive debt because I was living off of my mission support, which was adequate for living in India, not enough for living in the US. It wasn't enough to cover rent and gas and food. So I was having to put a lot on a credit card. When I told them that I was going to try to get a part-time job, they said, oh, okay, let us know when it starts, because once it starts, we have to cut off your support. Well, raising funds is already a full-time job because you're just calling people all of the time. And so I couldn't get a full-time job and raise my support because then I wouldn't have time to raise support. But a part-time job wasn't going to be enough to cover my expenses either. So there was this church that was letting me clean, and they were paying what they would have paid me to the AG so that my monthly support could be a bit bigger. But even that wasn't enough. They had this stupid rule where married couples, the non-head of household, could get a part-time job, but singles couldn't do that. And so I was failing at raising my funds, and I just had this crisis of faith because this is what I was born for. God had called me to do this, and I've dedicated everything to his plan for my life. And why isn't he providing for me in this moment?
Yeah.
And I felt there must be something wrong with me. Like, where did I mess up? Where did I fall short? What am I doing wrong that I can't raise this support? And it got to the point where I was just really burnt out after just years of giving my 100%. In India, there were multiple times where I would work myself so hard that I would be bedridden, just ill. And in that situation, it's spiritualized because it's just, oh, it's spiritual warfare. You know, Satan's attacking you because, you know, you're working so hard for God. Really, it was just I was working myself into burnout. I was working my body so much that I was getting physically ill regularly. And that's not sustainable after years. And it definitely took a toll on my body and what I can handle. And so I ended up in this place where I just had no more to give. And if I couldn't be a missionary, I can't do anything else with my life. I've dedicated everything to this. I had built my entire identity around it. And so I decided that it was probably just better to die because I couldn't take it anymore. And at the time, I had an opportunity finally to go to a church that was really far on the other end of my state. And so I decided I would take a trip up through South Dakota and I would see like the Black Hills, and then I would go to the Badlands. And my intention was to have a hiking accident in the Badlands. Because I felt that it would be easier for friends and family to grieve if they thought I just died accidentally doing something that I loved, which was hiking. And I got myself in the Badlands in a position that I don't know how I got out of it because I lost a few hours of time. It was where like to the right or left, I would have fallen and died. It was too high up forward. And I don't know how I shimmied up backward, but I must have. I just remember the next thing, I was about 2 hours away from there on the highway. So I had somehow gotten out and was okay. But losing time, it really shook stuff for me. And it's what got me to start going to therapy. And in therapy, started to realize just how much trauma I had, because I had enough trauma in childhood to give me a dissociative disorder, which is why I blacked out and lost the time, because I dissociated and somehow got out of it. But that memory is lost to me, because it's not that I wasn't in control, but the conscious part of me was not in control in the moment. And so that was huge. After just a few years of that therapy, I started really questioning everything. I had already temporarily put missions on hold. I talked to a woman who used to be a spiritual mentor for me and just told her that I was struggling. And she encouraged me to approach the Bible and to approach God as if it was brand new to me, because I had grown up in Christianity. And she's like, maybe you need a fresh perspective. And she wholeheartedly believed that I would end up as a Christian by the end of it. But I'm so thankful to her, because her saying that gave me the freedom to step away and look at things critically that I had never looked at critically before. And it was at that point where, not that my shelf broke, but almost that my shelf got pulled out from the wall or the wall disintegrated. Because, like I said, I had created my whole sense of self around this call to be a missionary. And I finally started to try to figure out who even am I without that. I ended up completely walking away from Christianity.
Wow.
Because just so much of it, looking back, it just didn't make sense when you look at it from an outsider perspective. And it's like, if I hadn't been raised in this, what kind of person would I even have been? And if I hadn't been raised in this, there are so many things that I wouldn't just accept as true.
It's really interesting how you were able to actually do that, where you were able to look at things through a completely different lens. Do you remember any of those moments where you maybe read a verse and realized, oh, I don't know if that's what I think it means, but this is what I was told it meant?
Mm-hmm.
How were you able to decipher that?
Part of that is a little difficult, because I did do a lot of training in exegesis and hermeneutics. So exegesis is like really studying scripture in the original language and figuring out what it means and what it meant for the people at the time that it was written.
Yeah.
So I really knew my stuff. But part of stepping back was dropping, just accepting how things harmonize. So for example, there are a couple different narratives through the Gospels about Jesus's birth.
Mm-hmm.
And in one, his family flees to Egypt and then comes back later. In another one, they don't flee at all. And in one, they're originally from Nazareth and travel to Bethlehem, where Jesus is born. And then in the other one, they're from Bethlehem and then move to Nazareth for the first time. And there were ways that people harmonize this. It's like, oh no, the authors are just highlighting different parts. But if King Herod really went and murdered all of the baby boys of a certain age, how does the other author not even mention that?
Yeah.
So it's stuff like that, where there are inconsistencies or things that don't make sense. Or why would an all-powerful God who created everything need to become his own son so that he could die to pay the price for our sins? Like, was he not powerful enough to do it some other way? It just is very convoluted.
That makes a lot of sense to me. I remember having those same type of thoughts too. Where I was like, okay, he had to die for our sins, but why though? Didn't he create the rules to the game?
Right.
Who decided that he had to die?
If heaven is real, that means God is capable of creating a paradise with no pain and no suffering. So why create this world first? Is God not perfect? Is God not loving? I finally was allowing myself to think about the things that I had brushed aside before and examine things that I had just accepted as okay.
That makes sense. So you had academically studied the Bible the way that scholars would study the Bible and draw consensus from it and understand the historicity of it. But you were still clouded with the version that you were told. And so you just accepted everything the way that your religion taught you versus the way academically you were learning it. And so really you were just like, okay, I'm willing to admit that this side over here doesn't make any sense. And then I need to just go with what the scholars are saying. That makes sense to me. So it was more of just like a whole perspective lift off. It was like a lens came off and you still had the foundation that you were taught previous.
And it did take time. It was years because I would still pray all of the time. There was parts of me that still wanted it to be true because it's nice to think that there'll be a heaven where you can see loved ones that have died. Like there are things that are very lovely and very beautiful about the Christian faith, but there are things that are very dark. There was just one ordinary day, maybe about 3 years after the start of my deconstruction, where I realized that, oh, I don't believe in God anymore. And I don't think I have for a while. And so it was a slow process and it took some time. It's not that I didn't want to leave my faith. In the end, I just became not convinced of what the Bible teaches anymore.
That's something that we talk about a lot too, is when people leave, those who are still in tend to point the finger and say, well, you just wanted to sin or you just blah, blah, blah. You were never faithful enough. But it's actually been proven through surveys and statistics that people who are more devout end up leaving because they're actually doing the research and asking all the hard questions and seeing the inconsistencies. And that's what's so tricky about it is no one really wanted to leave the religion, but they kind of were forced to when they couldn't look away at the facts or they couldn't look away from the facts where they're going, but it's right here. I can't unsee this. So how do you expect me to stay and lie to myself when I know the truth now? And so that's what's hard for people to understand who are still in.
Right.
It's like, you just wanted to leave. No, I didn't. I was not perfectly happy, but I wanted to stay in the system that I knew the hardships. I didn't want to have to figure out the hardships outside of it. That's a whole different world to navigate. I didn't know what I was getting into.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So it's so hard to be in that position. And it's so heartbreaking too. And that's another thing people don't think about is I didn't choose to leave it. I felt like I was booted out and betrayed by it, which is an entirely different set of heartbreak where you're like, wait a second. Was it all a lie? Was my life a lie? Is my identity a lie? It truly feels like a breakup in some ways, liberating as it may be. It's still a breakup.
There's so much grief, I think. And I've experienced so much grief because you're losing community, you're losing family, you're losing like an entire mindset of thinking. And for me, since I had built my entire identity around this, I had to figure out who I was. Because I was robbed of being able to do that properly as a child. Because in childhood, there's that point where, personality forms and, children really come into themselves and figure out who they are. And that was robbed from me because it was directed in a very specific way. And so I didn't just deconstruct from Christianity. I had to deconstruct myself, and I am still working on reconstructing myself after that, figuring out who I am, what I like, what I'm actually passionate about, and what I enjoy. And there's grief over that loss of self and that loss of who you could have been had things been different. if I had deconstructed in college, if I had deconstructed in high school, if I had never been raised in a Christian family, who could I have been? What potential was lost? Because I gave my all to this, and my skills aren't exactly applicable to other stuff very easily. All of the stuff I did a lot of damage to myself, and I was already like in a body that shouldn't have been pushed in the way that it is. Like I've got a connective tissue disorder and some other chronic illnesses. And so I've made those worse by how I lived my life in the past. And I have to deal with all of that now.
Yeah.
And now I'm going to physical therapy and working on those things. But there's also grief of all of the ways I've wrecked my body and my nervous system.
Yeah.
And so I do feel like leaving religion, I didn't do it because I just wanted to sin. I did it because you don't get to choose what you believe. And when I was no longer able to believe in Christianity because of what I feel are evidence and facts against it, I can't reconvince myself. People who are Christian, who are still in my life, I've told them that, hey, if God wants me back, he has my number. Like if he's all knowing, he knows how to get in touch with me. He knows how to reconvince me. And if he doesn't do that, then I'm just going to continue to not believe.
Yeah, I don't blame you. How did your family react?
I don't talk with them about it because the moment that I do, I can no longer have a relationship with them.
They don't know.
I think they suspect certain things. Like I think they know that I'm not going to go back into the mission field. The moment that they know, especially my mom, we won't be able to have any other conversations other than her trying to convince me to come back or berate me to come back. And so I know that people advise to tell them so that it's on your own terms. But for me, I just want to enjoy having a bit of a relationship with them for as long as I can. And when it gets ruined, it'll be their fault, not mine.
This is a big deal because there's a high probability they're going to see this. Are you okay with that?
I know that there's a chance for that. I've known that there's a chance of that from the moment I started my channel, even though it's small. And so I know that that's a possibility. It is something that I have come to terms with and I am okay with because I know it's going to happen one day eventually. I'm not a very confrontational person when I'm in person. And so it's just, I haven't been able to tell them.
Ooh, this is a big deal. If they happen to come across this, do you feel like everything will change with them?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It'll most likely be the end of that relationship.
Oh, man.
I'll
Liz.
probably have to cut them off.
I'm suddenly feeling responsible and I'm like, oh no, is this okay?
No, don't. There's already just a lot of strife there because, like I said, I am autistic. I got diagnosed as an adult, but I've been autistic my whole life. My mom thinks, and my biological brother is also autistic, just for reference, and it is a genetic thing. I'm pretty sure my dad's autistic. But my mom thinks autism is vaccine injury and that it can be cured with like proper diet. And so there's already a lot of things that we butt heads on that we don't agree on. And my parents are the type of people that if they weren't my parents, I would have cut them out of my life a long time ago. But they're my parents. And I think biologically people always want to have a good relationship with the people who were their caregivers.
Yeah.
And as much as I want to have a good relationship, they make it impossible with their political views and other things. So you can cut this out if you want, because your viewers might not want to know this. My parents drink their own urine. They believe this is a newer thing. And my mom sat me down to try to convince me to do it too, because she believes it's cured all of her ailments, because she thinks that God created us so that we produce our own medicine, and that medicine is the urine.
Oh no.
And so you can decide if you want to leave that in or not. But
that I haven't heard of that before. Is that a thing that people do in religious spaces?
It's more of like the crunchy mom type of thing.
Okay.
Of doing things all natural and avoiding doctors and performing homeopathy. So they'll call it urotherapy, but that just means drinking your own urine, or like aging it in a jar to like rub on things.
Okay, I haven't heard of that, but I'll have to look into that.
My parents weren't that crazy when I was young. Like, this is a newer development.
Yeah.
And between that and, like I said, their political views, we just make polite small talk regularly at this point.
So if they see this and all of a sudden everything is cut off, communication, everything, is there anything that you would want to say to them without the pressure of saying it to their faces? Anything that
Yeah.
you would want them to know?
I will always love them, and I will always wish and hope we could have a good relationship where I can actually, be myself and speak my mind and be loved and accepted for it, because I am ready to love and accept you. But I know that there are parts of me and things about me that you'll not accept. But I will always wish and hope that they will come to a place where it won't matter to them that I disagree with them in certain areas. It won't matter to them that we don't share the same faith. And so while I don't think that'll happen, I'll always hope for it.
Yeah.
And that does make me emotional.
Well, that's all any child would really want, right? Is to be loved and accepted unconditionally, regardless of beliefs or even actions. And so, of course, it makes sense for you to want that. And I hope if they do hear this, that they are touched by your words and maybe their eyes can be open to, you are their kid and they should be doing that because it's their job as parents to love unconditionally. What about your brothers or your siblings? Where do they stand?
My biological little brother, he's right there with me. He stopped being a Christian a lot longer before I did. And I actually contributed to trauma for him, which I have apologized for because I used to always pressure him in childhood to be a better Christian. And I found out later, because he and I talk, we have a really good relationship now, and we've talked through a lot of stuff and how our childhood wasn't very conducive to raising well-adjusted adults. But apparently in childhood at one point, my parents tried to cast a demon out of my brother when he was probably just having like an autistic meltdown. And in that case, like, it's going to seem like it worked because you're going to pray over the kid. Their meltdown's going to get worse because more sensory overload. And then eventually they're going to go numb, dissociate, and like detach, burn out. And then it's going to seem like the demon was cast out.
Yeah.
And so he and I are on the same page, and we talk about stuff like that from time to time. It's been really healing. My 2 adopted siblings, I don't talk with them much at all anymore. I never got the opportunity to be very close. I only shared a home with them for 4 years, and I tried my best to be there for them, but they both are living their own lives out of state. Everybody's adults now, so I do my best to try to keep in contact with them, but there's not a lot of communication there.
And then who have you become with all this deconstruction? What are some traits that you're finding, oh, this is the real Liz?
So I'm still really a compassionate person. I like to be there to help and support others and encourage them and help empower them to, achieve their dreams. I do improv as a job. So I get to perform. I thought it was really funny when you had a recent episode with the knitting cult lady, and she talked about how we all want to be actors. I laughed because it's like, I'm an actress. I'm an improv actress for a murder mystery dinner theater.
How fun.
Yeah.
Stop. What is your role?
Most recently, I've been getting to be the detective, which is my absolute favorite because the 2 detectives, they run the show, they get to make the jokes, and it's fun because you like set up your partner for the other jokes. But even though we have a script, every show is different because there's audience participation. But sometimes I'm that, sometimes I'm the killer, sometimes I'm a shady person pretending to be a guest. It's all very fun. And it takes the masking skills that I learned in life, and I get to use them for play.
Yeah.
And it's very healing, just getting to sit and become a different person. And so I really enjoy that. So yeah, I am an actress now. I do improv. I also have a small YouTube channel where I sometimes address pastors' sermons and their really bad theology because I still know my stuff, and I'll explain how their interpretation is incorrect. Or sometimes I'll look at a prophet and point out how bad their prophecies are. Other times I just react or do funny things like dramatically read chick tracts.
What's
and
a
do
chick
all the
tract?
voices. Oh, so chick tracts
She
are
goes,
those
"Oh."
they're these little comics that are meant to like bring people to Christ, but some of their topics are like about how evil Halloween is and how it's like Satan's birthday or Satan's holiday, and we'll have like kids wanting to sacrifice stuff or but all of them end up having a Christian message. But there's even like one about Freemasonry and stuff like that. It's really interesting. So they're evangelization tools. They're one of the things that sometimes wait staff at restaurants will complain about, because instead of leaving a tip, somebody will leave a chick tract.
Oh my gosh.
Or like on Halloween, when kids come to the door for candy, instead of getting candy, they'll get a chick tract
Oh,
about how evil Halloween is
Talk
and how
about a
they need Jesus.
disappointment.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I've never heard of that. Before we end, I just have to know what the audition was like to get your improv job at the murder mystery party.
Oh my gosh, it was really fun because the audition was just a series of improv exercises. And so they would have us do some, then send us out, and then call people back, have us do some more, send us out, call people back. And so I got to the end of it. It was just a lot of improv exercises with others. The very end one was we had to line up, and it was called radio, and he would just change the radio station. We'd have to like step up and start singing something of that genre, because they were specifically wanting people who could also sing, because one of the roles in some of the scripts has to sing both during the show and then when they're dying. And that's one of my favorites. I like to, during the show, I'll sing Since You've Been Gone. And then when I'm dying, I will pull the knife out of myself and then pull it up like a mic and be like, I've just been stabbed.
Oh my God.
It's great.
I had to know, as a little tangent, as an actor myself and having done improv classes, guys, improv is really difficult. It requires a lot of different parts of your brain. The callbacks and just everything is on your feet. That's awesome.
Oh yeah. And callbacks are my favorite.
Yeah.
And our show always uses them, especially in the end. Like even our killer has to like pay attention to the show, because when they're getting arrested, they make a bunch of callbacks just to like random audience members. I love callbacks.
That's so awesome. Are you comfortable telling people where they can come find you and see the show?
Depending on where you live, you're not going to find me, but Dinner Detective is national. So if you just look up Dinner Detective in your city, there might be one. I'm in Omaha and Lincoln. We share a cast in Nebraska between the two. I'm more often in Omaha.
How fun. I hope people just show up after watching this and find you. That's so cool. In a positive way, not in a stalker way.
Yeah, don't stalk me, please. And then if anyone's interested in my YouTube channel, it is Former Fundy.
Okay, perfect. Do you have any social media that you want to share? Any handles?
Nope. I have a very small social media presence. I like my feeds to just be like cat videos.
I don't blame you. Keep it casual.
and I'm hiding from people because I went to pretty much every Assemblies of God church in my state and a few like the state over. And so I always am worried that I'm going to run into someone who knows me and all of the questions.
Yeah, makes sense. All right. Was there anything we didn't cover that you wanted to say before our Linda Listen moment?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, let's do your Linda Listen moment then.
I've thought about a few, but there's one that is really sticking out because of what we said at the beginning. And because I recently did a different interview with someone who's writing a play about people who grew up in evangelical Christianity, and like the script is going to be mostly quotes, like real quotes from people. Some of what we talked about after in that, and what we talked about at the beginning of this is, Linda, listen, teaching your kids about hell is child abuse. They're not ready for it. It's going to either make them anxious all of the time about their own soul and the souls of all of their friends and family, or it's going to make them emotionally detached and uncaring. And both is very unhealthy for a child.
I hear you. Solid statement. All right. Well, this was awesome, Liz. Thanks for applying and wanting to be on and sharing your story. And I hope if it does get back to your family that it is a peaceful situation. And I hope they really hear you.
Yeah.
Let me know if that ever happens, because I'm curious. I'm always curious to reach. Sometimes it's like within hours of the upload, and sometimes it's weeks later or months later. People are like, oh, my community is messaging me and they found it. Yeah. So I'm always curious how it reaches people. Yeah.
Speaking of your reach, my therapist is a huge fan.
Oh, that's cool.
I mentioned in my autistic like group therapy with other autistic women that I was interviewing for this, and the therapist who leads that was like, oh my gosh, I love that podcast.
That's amazing. Love to hear that. Well, you'll have to let them know how it went. Well, they'll probably see it if they watch the show.
Oh yeah, they're like, let us know when it's gonna be up, so I will let them know when I know.
That's so cool. Well, this has been awesome. Any final thoughts?
It's been really great. Thank you so much for having me on. I've been a fan for a while. I really like what you do. And I think when I first started watching you, I would have never applied to be on because I didn't feel like I was in a cult or in a high control environment. Over time, I realized that I definitely was. And your other interview with Assemblies of God people really encouraged me to apply.
Oh, wow. That's great to hear. And we get that a lot too. People will say, I am not from a high control group, but I can relate to this. And then maybe a little later we see the comment of, well, maybe I was. So it's good. And it's like a slow build, hopefully, to where you can slowly unwind things and see the similarities. And that's why we do this. So people can feel validated in whatever it is that they went through and know that they're not alone. So thanks for sharing that. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to leave those words of encouragement down below for Liz. It means a lot to our guests. It helps the algorithm. It supports our show, gets more eyes on these so that more people can see these stories and feel validated and heard and seen themselves. And if you want to support further other than just interacting with the post, you can become a channel member. We have some memberships where it's $3, $4, maybe $5 a month where you can get behind the scenes content and members only live streams. But don't worry, our main content is never going behind a paywall. It's just extra BTS stuff where you can see what we're doing and the guests that we're getting and give us your input and opinions. And definitely go check out our playlist with other Assemblies of God people. As Liz said, we've done a few there and you can go check that out. And I think that's it. Thank you so much. And until next time, follow your highest excitement, be conscious, and be well.